hit some intro music and let's just get this thing rolling.
Yep.
Hey guys, welcome back to episode number 9 of the RamblinFly podcast. I am one half of your host, Adam Hudson. The other half of our host is here, Brent. Need to go back and refer to episode number 2, I think, where he told us how to say his last name because I don't remember it. But thanks so much for watching. So real quick, wanted to let you guys know we are putting these also on Spotify and the Google podcasts as well. So if you guys are out there driving or whatever, you want to listen to this, you can listen to it on your phone, on the go, whatever, on Spotify or Google. And as obviously, we are also putting these on the Blue Line channel on YouTube under the RamblinFly playlist. So
there's no excuse for you or your friends to not watch or listen.
What if it's not very good?
That's not a good enough excuse. Everyone has an extra hour of their day.
That's right. I agree with that. So you heard it from Brent. There's no excuse for you to not be watching and playing along with our podcast. So also make sure that you follow us on the Instagram at RamblinFly. We just did a poll over there and got a lot of cool questions that we're going to be answering later in this episode.
Yep. There's a poll or question in the story.
That.
But thank you for everyone that did submit questions. It's really helpful, and I think it makes what we talk about in the podcast a little more relevant because we are the RamblinFly podcast. We can just veer off into the weeds pretty easy. So
it says it right there in the name.
Yeah, I guess we should just kick things right off and get things moving. We did have one news piece that kind of is going to turn into a bit of a debate, and hopefully you guys will weigh in the comments or shoot us a message on Instagram. I live in Colorado and I've grown up in Colorado, so I've always been one that knows, or at least in the state of Colorado, the landowner owns the river bottom. They do not own the water that goes through. But there is a case going on in Colorado on the Arkansas River, and it's gotten through the state courts, I believe, but they're trying to decide whether or not the public should have access to the high water mark and be able to wade on the bottom of what used to be or still is private section of river. I know Montana, a handful of other states, as long as you're under the high water mark and you get into the riverbed via public access, then you're not trespassing. That is not the case in Colorado. The landowner owns the bottom of the river, so the only way to fish on public water, or private water, without permission would be to float through on the water itself and never touch the bottom.
And do they have some laws there too with like anchoring up, where even though you're floating, you're good, but you can't anchor? Are there laws about
you can't touch the bottom of the river?
Are you still allowed to fish it from a boat, even if it's public?
Yep.
Okay, so that's at least good, but you can't anchor, you can't get out of the boat, whatever, in certain sections, private sections.
Yep. And technically, like if you're rowing down the river and you scrape the bottom or bump into a rock, you would have been trespassing if you touch that rock.
Well,
now obviously that becomes a challenge to enforce.
You better not let
there
Steven
are some sections
row on some private water. A lot of trespassing.
That guy. Yep. So anyway, there's a guy in the Arkansas River Valley who is taking this as far as he can, and it sounds like what it's coming down to is in 1876. They made these laws, and basically it says if the river was once navigable, you could argue that now the public has access to the river bottom as well. But if they don't determine this river to be ever navigable, then there's probably no leg for him to stand on based on the Colorado legislature.
So the guy that's bringing this up, this 80-year-old whatever guy who's fishing the Arkansas, is he a landowner or is he a fisherman is he fighting it for fishermen or is he fighting it for the landowners?
No, he's a fisherman fighting it against the landowners.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Well, that's good to know.
But what do you think, Adam? What's your opinion? Like, should the public be able to wade on the river bottom?
Yeah, I mean, most of the places I fish, I think that's actually a pretty more of a rare occasion. Most of the places that I fish is, as you mentioned, you can access through a public area, and as long as you stay below the high water mark, then you're good. So as long as the river is navigable, which this is the case in Alabama, which is probably where I'm most familiar with, as long as it's navigable, which could mean anything from like a kayak or even a canoe. So nearly almost any river is navigable. You're good as long as you are in the water below the high water mark. So, uh, I mean, personally, I think that's great because that lets me be able to get in and out of the water, stay in the river, and you're good. But generally, that's most of the states that I fish in, most places that I'm used to fishing in. That's the rule.
Yeah.
I know there's a couple places like in Georgia. I want to say is kind of weird. Like the landowners do own the bottom of the river, and so there's certain places you're not allowed to anchor. But I think they also have certain places you're not allowed to even fish. Like going through these areas, you've got to like put your rods up, like you got to put them down, and you just have to row through these stretches of water that are owned by the landowners.
That's interesting. I don't know. The public fisherman in me wants the public to have access through the river bottom and be able to wade. That way you don't have to buy a boat to fish these what used to be or still are private sections. But man, if I bought a house on a river, I'd probably not want people to be able to wade through my backyard.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I think you're good as long as you stay in the river. Then I don't know. That's just kind of like the if you bought a house on a river, that's the deal.
Yeah, you just got to know it.
You got to. I mean, I don't know if these people don't know that when they buy the place, or maybe they're only
I'm
go
sure they know
look at the house on a Tuesday when nobody's out there waiting or something, and then Saturday comes after they moved in, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, what's going on here?"
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I'm sure in Colorado they know, like, if I buy this section, that is my section of river, and the only people that can fish it are the ones that float through it.
Yeah, that's true.
So
I guess that makes a pro. If you're rich like that and want to have a river house, that probably makes a pro to buying somewhere in the state of Colorado over like Idaho or something.
Yeah, sure.
But I don't know. That's interesting too. Maybe that's because there's more people waiting in Colorado than other states like Idaho. There's just less people.
Yeah, could be.
So maybe it's less of a deal. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, we could debate on that all day. The one other part I want to bring up to this is in Colorado, there's a number of fishing clubs, I guess you'd call them, that will buy sections of river. They'll manipulate the bottom of it, make it like the perfect trout habitat, and then they'll dump in tons of huge stocked fish. I know right before we started recording, you had mentioned something about stocked trout in natural rivers. If we went to the high water mark rule where you could wade under the high water mark, I would bet that discourages a lot of landowners from dumping a ton of money into their section of river and stocking it. So
yeah, if there was a bridge or something that was a mile downriver that you could hop in and then wade up to their stretch of water, probably would discourage people from doing that a little more, I think.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
That could be good for the natural trout population, but
yeah,
you'd lose some money for these high-end lodges or fishing clubs.
I think that's probably, I don't know. I don't have that much of an issue with people if you own the land and you own the river and you're going to manage it like a natural resource management and you actually know what you're doing. I would say, I think that's probably relatively fair. If they want to, if it is like this, you own the river, you own the bottom of the river, it's a piece of your property, then do whatever you want to on it. I don't care if people, I don't know, I would see it more that way if they like the same thing as like if you own a farm pond and you want to stock it with bass or whatever it is you want to do, fine, it's your pond, do it.
Yeah. I think the biggest issue with that is by putting the pellets and feed that's not natural to the river in there, then it could jack with the rest of the biology downstream from there. So it's not totally the same as a farm pond because...
Yeah, I guess it depends. I don't know. I guess it also just kind of, for me, would depend on how large the piece is. I mean, yeah, if you own 200 yards of river, then that's going to easily flow out into public areas potentially. But if you own, I don't know, miles of river that are private, I'm not sure. But I guess also that asterisk star there, if you actually resource management, you know what you're doing. But I don't know.
that's the big thing there is like, are you going to manage it where it's not going to affect the rest of the river, or are you just going to like pump a bunch of crap into the
Sorry. Well, but I feel like the public people, so just say for instance, right, that maybe there's this mile stretch upriver of a boat ramp where these people are doing this. I mean, if they are stocking these monster pellet fed fish and they are growing these just giant fish, you would think generally the rest of the people waiting would wind up seeing those fish a year or two later. I mean, those fish aren't just going to sit. I mean, a lot of them will just sit there at that private stretch. But if you end up getting some bigger fish throughout the entire river, I mean, it wouldn't be too big of a surprise if you caught, one of their fish a mile downriver from their place. And I think most people,
and that happens. Totally.
Oh yeah. And I think most people, the majority of people would probably be excited about it. I mean,
totally.
Especially if you're in there and you're hooking, 14, 16 inch fish is a good fish. And then all of a sudden you run across one of these farm raised pellet stocked fish that are, is a 24. Even if it is a pellet fish, I'd probably be like, ooh, that's fun.
Yeah, totally. So, they are fun. But the argument against that is that by putting those hatchery fish in there, if they end up breeding with the natural fish, then you can dumb down the natural genes and whatever. And I'm sure that has some clout to it. Like that would make a difference in the sustainability of the natural fish. So I don't know. It's a tough one because even in most natural sections, there's some degree of divisional wildlife working inside of that river. Right. So it's not a completely natural river anyway. So.
Yeah, I don't know. That's definitely a weird one. As Brent said, hit us up on Instagram or DM us your thoughts, or leave those in the comments below on this video. We'd be curious to see what you guys think. Probably, I think it might be interesting too to know what if you leave a comment, maybe what state you're from too, or what kind of maybe a little bit of what your laws are. Because I'd be curious to see maybe the people in Colorado are all upset about these laws, but the people in Montana are upset about the Colorado laws. Who knows? So be interested to know where you're from if you do leave a comment.
It would definitely let the population spread out quite a bit.
Yep. And
you might not get as where you show up to Deckers on a Saturday and there's 3 people in every hole. It might ease that pressure a little bit.
What is Deckers?
It's a section of the South Platte River that's very popular because it's super close to Denver. You can see all the fish, and there's some pretty good fish in there. So,
okay, there we are.
Quite popular.
Don't go to Deckers, or do go to Deckers.
Comment below if you fish Deckers every Saturday, like I used to. So
cool.
All right, well, that's a good segue into the viewer questions that we got on Instagram.
Yeah, some of these were questions that we just wanted to answer in this episode, and a few of the others, if you don't see a question that you asked here, might be a coming topic in a future podcast. So really appreciate you guys that reached out to us about that. Please keep doing that. And if you got a good question or an idea, don't wait for us to post about it. If you got something for us, go ahead and leave it in the comments below or shoot us a DM on Instagram.
All right. Question number 1, public versus private. What's the best way to tell that you're on public or private besides being at a boat
when
ramp?
The cops show up to arrest you?
Yep.
It's the easiest way to know.
Yeah, if you see those red and blues, just hop on out of the river.
That's the best way to tell.
No, don't don't push it that far. In Colorado, at least, usually the landowners will have lots of signage saying like, "Hey, this is my property line. Don't step foot over this." And if not, the state will have BLM signs or state access signs. So most of the time, it's pretty well marked. But if you're in an area where there's not good signage, there are tons of apps, and your phone is quite powerful at telling you where the actual property lines lie. So,
Onyx or Trout Routes are the two that definitely come to mind that are really good for figuring out where you stand as far as private or public access would go.
How do you know about Trout Routes?
Oh, they were a sponsor for for the short bus thing that we did in Colorado. So we
yeah. Have you guys been using that on the trips?
Actually, it is actually really quite helpful. You can awesome. download the app and you can see boat ramps, camping. It's actually extremely useful for planning a trip, especially if it's somewhere that you like don't live or you don't go all the time or something. You know, and you haven't spent a ton of time there. You can kind of see, oh, okay, here's a spot we could launch the boat, and here's a campground that we could go to afterwards. So yeah, it is very helpful.
All right. Enough free plugs. Second question. I think I'm going to let you take the ball on this one.
So one of you guys asked us about streamer leaders, and I totally get leaders. You know, I mean, you can go off so far in the weeds if you're new on leaders. I feel like every new person just gets so hung up on leaders. I don't know. Were you that way, Brent? Did you ever get just so far off in the weeds on leaders you couldn't think straight?
No, and that is out of one quality of mine, and one quality only, and that's laziness.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, I always took the easy route. I'm actually now diving deeper into the weeds on this, but I'll let you start and then I'll weigh in.
So, I kind of designed a streamer leader a little while back, especially that I started using myself and that I really started perfecting when I was guiding a lot. That, so for those of you who are watching this, if you're listening to this, you might want to hop over to YouTube for a quick little, example. So the entire thing from the butt section of the leader with the little loop that you tie to your swivel or that you tie to your fly line, where you tie your fly onto is called a leader. The whole thing is called the leader. There's the butt section of the leader, which would be the kind of thicker tapered part down to somewhere about halfway. Then the other side of it would be the tippet. So the tippet would be from kind of about midpoint-ish to where you tie your fly onto. So pretty simple explanation for what the leader is. So this guy was asking specifically for streamers, what length leader. The swivels or the leaders that we sell on our site are right around 7 to 7.5 foot. I like the shorter leaders, especially if you're throwing larger flies. It really helps kind of create that power transition from your fly line to turn over those flies. It makes a lot of sense to me to have that 7.5 foot leader. I don't like fishing streamers on a 9 foot leader. Generally, I find that there's just too much material that doesn't turn over your fly very well. The other pro of having a short leader is if you fish a sink tip line with your streamers, which I do probably 99% of the time. You have less of kind of a buffer between the sinking of your line and the effect that it has on the fly. So shorten that up, really helps pull your fly down deeper, quicker. So
hold on, Adam. Just for those that don't know, when you're using sinking lines, most of the time, the sinking line is pulling the fly down. So if this is your fly line, then your leader would be your hand here. The line is going to be pulling it down. So the shorter your leader is, the deeper your fly is going to be. But the longer your leader is, the shallower your fly is going to be. So that's why Adam's talking about the shorter leaders getting your flies a bit deeper.
I think it's streamer fishing is tough because there's a mental, I don't really know exactly how to describe it, like a mental game that you have to play in your head with depth versus where your line and where your fly is at, and that you kind of have to almost visualize in your mind's eye, but you can't actually see it. So I think that's one of the problems. I mean, same with nymphing as well. Not that I do that, but with what?
Never
Same
done that
same kind
before.
of situation though. I think there's this mental game, and having that shorter leader lets you be able to visualize in your mind's eye kind of where your fly is getting to because of relation to your fly line. There's less disconnect there. So that's as far as length goes. Those are some of the pieces of information you need. Size, I use anywhere generally between 12 and 15 pound. I don't know about you. I use 12 pound fluorocarbon for pretty much almost all of my trout applications. I feel like, if you start fishing for fish that are getting really spooky, or you're throwing small streamers that do not have very much weight, then I might bump down to like an 8 or a 10. But generally, if I'm out there and I'm, I'll start with 12, and then if I need to downsize, I will. I like 12 pound. You can get hung up, especially on a boat. A lot of the flies I fish with are like either R&D stuff, or R patterns at this point. Most of the stuff is not small or cheap or easy to tie. So
Right.
I also like to factor in the fact that I want to get my flies back. If you're trout fishing, if you go,
Yep.
most of my bass is all 15 pound. My smallmouth, you're going to tell me that yours are totally different, whatever, some dude on the internet. My smallmouth are not very leader shy. I don't think they specifically care. Generally, also, I'm throwing in really heavily wooded areas with a lot of down logs and rocks and stuff in the water. So I like to bump up to the 15 pound. Generally, I do tend to throw some bigger stuff for smallmouth too. So I like the bigger the tippet is, the easier it's going to turn over your fly, because it's stiffer and a little more material is going to allow your fly to turn over at the end of your cast. So it'll transition that energy out of your fly line to your fly better. So that would be the reason that like
Yep.
you could not throw, say, one of our Cooter Browns or like a Meemaw on like some 5x tippet. Like, it's just not going to work.
There's not enough energy transfer from the fly line through the leader
Yep.
to get to the fly.
So a couple other small little things I wanted to hit on here that he asked about specifically would be the taper. So most leaders are tapered, meaning that they go from thick at the butt section down to a thinner part where you tie the fly onto. So the ones that we tie are tapered. They're just there's not a progressive taper. It goes from a thick piece to a swivel to a thin piece. So that taper, again, from just what Brent said, really helps turn that fly over.
And that thinner piece kind of diffuses the energy so you don't get the really strong slap. It lets it curl out a little
Yep.
easier, which sometimes can matter while fishing streamers. Other times, I don't
Yep.
think it matters
Yep.
at all.
That's a definitely a really good point. And then we put swivels. I always fish a swivel almost exclusively in my leaders. Started doing that probably 20 years ago, and I just love it. Especially now that we get our own swivels made, specifically for us, that are smaller than anything you would buy in a bait shop. I mean, they're freaking microscopic tiny. If you've ever heard of a tippet ring, like you might, it's kind of, you know what a tippet ring is, Brent, right? Have you ever used tippet rings?
I've never Euro nymphed.
Not me. Mm-mm.
No,
no, that wasn't me. We need to do some sort of video where we actually go Euro nymphing, but we put on masks or something, like a like the
to hide
like
our
the president
identity.
mask.
Yeah.
It'd be like George Bush out there nymphing. You'd be like Bill Clinton. Anyways.
Yeah. Comment below if you want to see a YouTube video of Adam Euro nymphing with me as his fearless leader.
We'll do that. Anyways, I really love
Yeah.
the swivels. It just makes your life super simple because you don't have to tie any knot other than a clinch knot. For me, I've tied about a bazillion clinch knots in my day, so I can tie one of those super, super fast. I could tie a clinch knot way quicker than I could ever tie a double surgeons. Even when I got good at tying double surgeons, clinch knots so easy.
put a blood knot in Adam's
Game over.
hands,
I
it's
can't do
game
it.
over.
No, I can, because I do use the blood knots every once in a while. Pretty much all my saltwater stuff I use blood knots on. But besides the point, clinch knot is so easy. I can tie it so fast, and it's always right. So, really like the ability to do that. Plus that swivel, especially throwing larger flies. I learned this a long time ago, which is when I started using the swivel, was that when you would cast, you would get what would call a whirly bird or something in your leader, where if you ever like pull your leader up and hold it and your flies are just spinning, then that's obviously bad. Can weaken your leader, can kink your leader, and it can also put a weird movement in your fly as you strip, which is really common to see with like big poppers, deer hair heads, um, things like that for big streamers. The leader will it will spin as it's going through the air, and you do not want that. So the swivel helps stop that. But I've also found the swivel is extremely useful if you're going to swing or dead drift a streamer. It's way deadlier, because that piece of tippet, or that last piece that your fly is connected to, is to that swivel. So it is free to spin like a barrel roll as it's going down the river, which would look like a, especially if you're trout fishing, you've got like a dead sculpin kind of look, instead of, if the fish aren't just biting it as you're stripping it really hard. That swing with that roll is just so effective.
One other part that the swivel kind of helps with is breaking the surface tension to get your leader underwater. And that's one thing I wanted to touch on is, like, in my opinion, most of the time throughout the year, the trout aren't, if you're stripping a streamer, they're not going to care about the tippet size. I don't think they're spooking off the tippet. So really, you're just using tippet size to affect depth, because the thicker the tippet is, the harder it is to sink, and the more even fluorocarbon is going to take more weight to get down. So if you are fishing your flies close to the surface of the water, go ahead, throw 20-pound. That way you can yank it out of the trees and get the fish in faster. But if you're trying to fish a little deeper and you don't want to go heavier on your fly to make it more clunky casting, size down your tippet, maybe go down to that 12 or 10-pound, and it'll sink a little bit easier. But the barrel swivel certainly helps break the surface tension and sink a thicker leader than just a standard leader.
But the swivels are definitely, Brent is right, it does help break the surface tension, but those swivels are so light that they do not affect your sink rate. They do not affect your casting. I mean, they're absolutely, they're smaller than anything you can imagine. Like putting in your leader something that's this small and weighs less than a parachute Adams, like it will not affect your casting or your sink rates or anything like that.
When you had me casting those up in Idaho, I thought it was going to hinge because of the swivel. It did not. It rolled over just fine.
There's, I don't know if it's just the clinch knots are tight going to it or what, but there's no point where you might think that you would get to the end of the tippet and then it would just stop, or the ring, and it just stops, but it doesn't. Never does that. But I mean, I use those same tippet, or I use those same rings. I don't put it out on the internet because people are going to be all mad about it and super confused, and I'm going to have to answer a ton of emails. I use that same tippet rig for dry flies. I use a swivel in my dry fly rig. You put a small amount of grease or loon or chapstick or whatever in the world on it, floats all day. Anyways, if you want to try our streamer leaders, hop on over to the website, grab some. They're great. That's what I've used for probably 15 years, and I have no reason to change. So there you have it. Well, Brent, I think this next one might fall under your scope of expertise.
I'll take the lead on this one. I don't know the exact question. Maybe you can help if I miss something, but this person was asking about rod length. What are the factors and considerations in why you would go with a shorter rod versus a 9-foot rod? And also he asked about switch rods. So I guess we can talk about length in switch rods versus spay rods.
So I think, so really kind of what happened is we got a couple of questions and I kind of combined it all into one here. So rod length considerations, wants to know like a 7'10", that's a little specific. Like, kind of probably I would break it up into like a sub 9 foot, the standard 9 foot, probably a 10 foot, and then just kind of threw switch rods in there as well. Like, what's up with those? So,
Gotcha. Okay. Well, let's start with how rod length
God,
affects your casting. Yep, here we go with these again. I'll be pretty brief on this, but the shorter the rod is, the tighter your loop can physically be, because your rod is the input that is telling the fly line where to go and what it needs to do. So if you have a shorter lever, you can shrink the loop down really, really small. If you have a longer lever, it's much more difficult to shrink the loop down, and I got to pause for a second. I got distracted.
Go ahead, Brent.
So if you have a shorter rod, it's easier to get a smaller, tighter loop. But the longer the rod is, it's more natural to have a more open loop. I suppose it would be possible to get a small loop with a longer rod, assuming it's a fast action rod. But we'll assume that you're flexing deeper. So shorter rod means a tighter loop. Longer rod means a more open loop. But you also have more leverage with a longer rod. So I'll categorize it into short rods, 9-foot rods, and long rods. Short rods are going to be better for you for dry fly fishing because you're going to have more control of a tight loop. And
better presentation.
That helps you lay the fly down. Yep, that helps you lay the fly down a little bit softer. And it can help you get through the wind without having the weight of the flies to help cut through the wind. So 9-foot rod kind of is your jack of all trades. You can get a pretty tight loop and you can drive light flies through the wind, but you lose a little bit of leverage if it comes to roll casting, which is where you'd step into a 9.5 or a 10-foot rod, or even spay and switch rods, which gives you a lot of leverage and the ability to create a larger D loop to drive a roll cast. So short rod, great for dry flies, no lifting power, not as much lifting power, and not as much control roll casting. 9-foot rod is kind of average at all of the above. And then as you move into a longer rod, say a 10-foot rod, if we're talking single-handers, then you get a lot more control for roll casting. It's much harder to control an overhand cast for a small dry fly loop, but it could be done. And then if we move into switch rods versus spay rods, this will be really short. Basically, a switch rod is trying to be both a spay rod and a single hand rod, meaning in theory, you can cast a switch rod overhand, single-handed. They're huge, and like you're going to tire yourself out pretty quick on them. But switch rods generally have a more similar taper to a single-handed rod, meaning that they flex less deep and more just off the tip. So that could be an advantage, like at Pyramid Lake, when you have rocks right behind you or trees super close behind you, because you can cast just off the tip and still get a little bit of power out of them. Whereas in a spay rod, it flexes quite a bit deeper. You can load them deeper and cast further, but it does take a larger D loop and a little more space behind you.
I would definitely add in, so we talked about dries. Personally, not that I nymph a lot, but I like the plus 9-foot rods for nymphing for a few reasons. One, you get that little extra, as Brent's kind of talking about, that leverage. I like that leverage for setting the hook, but I also like the extra, just the extra length for mends. They definitely mend a whole lot better if you bump up from that 9+ foot rod. 9.5 or 10 mostly being what I'm talking about. You can definitely tell a difference in how well they mend line on big nymph drifts, whatever. I think that's big for me in a nymph situation. So I really do like that. So as kind of just a little bit of what Brent said, if you are a big dry guy, I would go the less than the 9 foot, because you can still nymph with that rod. It's still a good rod for some different things. By the 9 foot, if you want just the jack of all trades that does a little bit of everything, then if you want a more of a nymph specific rod, again, you can still throw dries on that 9.5 foot rod. There's nothing that says you can't. By the 9.5 foot, if you need to do a lot more roll casting, a lot more nymphs, a lot more, kind of technical close stuff, I like that 9.5 foot to 10 foot range. And then switch rods, I just don't like those. So you just skip that.
There's a place for them, but it's a pretty niche rod.
You need to really know what you're doing before you buy a switch rod, I think. Not in the terms of casting, but know what you're getting into.
Yeah.
Because
it's funny, a lot of people buy switch rods because they want to get into spey casting. But
I do not.
Switch rods are way harder to cast than a spey
lightweight spey rods are so cool.
Yeah.
Like the new trout spey stuff. I'm way into that. I have never played with a switch rod that I liked. I'm also not good, so.
Yeah, the IMX Pro short spays are way easier to cast than the NRX Plus
100%.
switch rods. Yeah, much more true.
If you're out there, you're thinking about buying a switch rod, don't. I don't know. That's.
Unless you're going to Pyramid, they're pretty dialed for Pyramid.
Well, hopefully that helped you out with your rod buying ideas. Brent, I think this next one also falls under the Brent scope. How much difference does one rod weight make? And the specific example was going from like a 3 to a 4 and a 6 to a 7, which I definitely understand where he's coming from. Brent, you want to tell us about that one since you know about fly rods?
So that's from a technical standpoint, I believe the difference in one rod weight is it's either 40 or 60 grains of weight in the fly line. So that doesn't mean much to most of us, but anyway, there is an actual difference in how much weight there is in the fly line to be considered a 4-weight or a 5-weight. But then there's such a big range of, well, you could have a 4-weight that takes, 120 grains to load, but it's a soft, slow action 4-weight, so it feels way more floppy than a fast action 4-weight that takes the same amount of grains to load. So it's kind of a loaded question, but let's assume we're talking like a fast action 4-weight versus a fast action
3 to 4, 6 to 7.
Well,
just so that we answer the gentleman's questions, we want to
3 to 4.
I want to simplify it for him.
Yep. Man, this is such a hard one. In my opinion, there is a definite difference between a 3 and a 4-weight.
Yes. 5
and a 6-weight, 6 and a 7-weight. That being said, and I'm sure you agree, we have cast a ton of rods and spent a lot of time casting. So we might be a little more sensitive to telling little differences. Someone that's newer might not be able to tell as much of a difference, but when the wind picks up and you're trying to cast into the wind, you will be able to tell the difference between one rod weight. No question. Yeah. Fighting a fish, I don't think it makes as big of a difference, at least when we're talking about trout. But I would say casting into the wind, yes, you'll notice the weight difference, and that might be more so because there's more grains in the fly line that are moving through the wind. But regardless,
I would say
it's the whole package.
Maybe to try to simplify it from my opinion, on like actually telling you like kind of where you're fishing. So I use a 3 if it's like North Carolina, Smoky Mountains, really small stream, small grown up, really tight quarters. I like the 3, and I have a pretty short 3 for that. And then if I'm more like bigger river, Western, more kind of Western style, even, or like a tailwater river, I would bump up to that 4. Gives you a lot better casting, a lot better mending. It's just a more versatile rod than a 3. 3s to me don't have a ton of place other than small little creeks. And then that 6 to 7, the 6 is my go-to rod. I use the 6-weight for so much stuff other than streamers. You can streamer fish well with a 6-weight, but if I throw big dries, if I'm throwing big dry drops, if I'm throwing big double dries with foam, if I'm throwing small single hook kind of beadhead streamers, I want a 6 weight. It does everything. And especially if you are bass fishing, a 6 weight is like hands down the one rod that you should pick up. But that 7 weight gives you a lot more backbone if you bump up to fishing sink tip fly lines. So I would say do the 6 if you want that floating fly, the floating line, the big general Swiss Army knife of rods, especially for like a tailwater or big Western rivers. I do a 6/5 because I can handle wind. I can handle big flies, like a big double chubby rig or a big heavy nymph rig. I don't have to change rods for that specifically. And it is a good streamer rod. You can fish, the smaller streamers with it just fine. But then bump up to that 7 for, I don't. Do you ever nymph a 7 weight? I mean, I have rarely. I mean, the 7 weight is a streamer stick for me.
Yeah.
So I bump up to the 7 for all of my trout and all of my bass. If you ever run across me and I'm streamer fishing, I have a 7 weight in my hand almost exclusively. I do use an 8.
But we generally like to fish bigger flies.
But those 7s have it's 40 grains or whatever Brent said, but realistically it makes so much of a difference switching up to picking up that big fly and having that extra power to pull it out of the water, and then having that extra power to push that sink tip line. The 7 makes so much difference, where a 6, I'm not saying you can't do it, but a 6 will want to kind of fold a little bit under that much pressure.
Yeah. And it wears your arm out a little more, like having to work using your arm to get.
I definitely understand your question. You obviously don't want to buy a 3, 4, 5, and 6, but for a lot of water, I would start with the 4, and then I'd skip a 5, unless you're only going to buy one rod. I'd buy the 5.
Yeah.
But if you were going to be the most versatile fisherman balling on a budget, I would have a 4 and a 6.
Yep.
I can't tell you the last time I use a 5-weight as my dry fly rod, but I can't tell you the last time I used a 3 or 4, other than on a small creek.
Yeah.
But I use a really, really lightweight 5 for my dries, a short 5 as well, and then I use a 9-foot 6-weight for everything that's not streamers.
Yep, that's a good one.
I don't know if that was helpful or not. Well, we got one more question for you guys, and then we'll let you go. This gentleman asked, what are the essentials to bring with you either in your boat bag or your wading pack?
I'll start.
Wipes.
Yeah, wipes. I'm going to go like just the basic essentials. I always carry an extra like coffee can or energy drink, because you got to have a pick-me-up.
Yep. If fishing's bad, you need that.
Yep.
Fishing's often bad when I fish.
And then I'll bring like a Cliff Bar or some kind of snack. If I'm like just going bare essentials, obviously some kind of fly box, a few spools of tippet, and split shot. You can probably get away with just that. But yeah.
I can run with that. I'd be with Brent. Generally I kind of know what I'm going to be doing that day, but 3 fly boxes, a box for like nymphs, a box for dries, a box for streamers, some tippet I'd probably scale down how much tippet I bring if I'm waiting, but in my boat bag, I have a lot of tippet. I keep some extra swivels always. Personally, I have a small bag of my swivels. Wet wipes, Slim Jims.
Those go hand in hand.
Beer. Normally keep some beers around. If I'm waiting, 90% of my waiting pack is just a beer mule, just a vessel to carry the beer for me.
Yeah.
Extra bobbers.
You got
bobbers.
flies,
You,
tippet,
yeah,
and bobbers.
yeah, that's it. Do you always bring a net when you wade, or does it just depend on where you're wading in the fish?
Depends how prepared I was. That's
Yeah,
always the
that's true.
worst, though, is like you just go out with no net. I'm going to go out for 10 minutes and fish, and then, of
That's
course,
when
you
you
hook
hook.
it
That's when you hook a toad.
yep, on 5X, and you're like, this is
Whoa,
not going to go well. Yep.
classic. Well, yeah, but you always fish deckers, so you could just turn to your left and be like, "Hey, man, could I borrow your net
Hey,
real quick?"
I need a net.
I don't even think you have to yell. Hey, buddy.
Just whisper.
Hey, man. Psst, hey.
Just reach over, grab his net.
Oh.
I'll put it right back.
I'll get back to you.
Nice drift.
You're doing good. I watched that cast 2 casts ago. It was really good cast, man.
Yeah.
That's kind of what it sounds like fishing to me there. But anyways, well, guys, we definitely appreciate you you reaching out, sending us these questions. We obviously, part of our point of this podcast is we want to make sure we're being relevant to you guys, answering questions that you have. Anyways, that's big for us. So we really appreciate you reaching out and telling us these things. Comment below if you you want to see other questions or topics. Make sure you follow us at RamblinFly for our podcast. And I think that's all we got for the folks, Brent.
That's it. We got a bunch of good ideas floating around, or what we think are good ideas. Gonna do some shorter episodes, and we'll probably be posting up some reels on the Instagram, clipping out little bits of these episodes, so that if you don't have an hour to sit down and listen to us ramble on, maybe you'll still be able to get some tips out of there. But that's what's in the pipeline from us. We will hopefully get these out, turned around pretty quick here. I know I'm getting a little better at it, but still slow.
There we go. Well, all right, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you guys on the water.
See you, everyone.
Outro.